Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Marley K. I wanted to come to you today because I want to talk to you a little bit about transhumanism and some research that I did. And I'm going to need y'all to work with me on this one because it's not my typical um, type of piece that I usually do. And I felt like it was important because we've been focusing a lot on politics and social issues, but we don't typically, take the science route of what is happening around us when it comes to climate change, um, just technological advances and science and things that are happening in real time that are really important that we need to know, especially Black people, because as we know, everything that they invent with the intent on harming us or controlling us or doing something to us. And so it is in our best interest to stay on top of it. And so I've been reading stuff about transhumanism for the last couple of years, and I've really been kind of quiet about it. I'll say something about it every now and then, but I've just been reading a lot lately, and with the stuff that came out with the COVID vaccine, I'm not going to get into that. Not going to go there, but I'll put some links in the description so that you can go and do your own research and see like what is happening in the world of medicine, pharma, things that we don't know about, and I'll just say if you did take the cocoa, you know what the cocoa is. You did take the cocoa. I recommend, there are a couple of links that I'm going to put in the description, but they are going to be tied to um, this topic of transhumanism and some of the experiments that are going on now. But that is later. What I would like to say, I hate to do disclaimers before I do something, but I want to say that this is going to answer a lot of questions. This piece is going to address a lot of questions that people have, and it's going to tie a lot of concerns that we have about all the push for trans. You think of transhumanism, it didn't just come out of no place. Transhumanism is an evolution of transsexuality, transgender, trans everything. And I wrote a piece and I'm gonna put a link to it in the bio. But I wrote a piece and it's long, but I would really like for y'all to read it because I'm this video would be really long if I did the entire piece, but there's the evolution of transvestite, transgender to transhumanism is all connected, and I want to show you the connection. But not only that, I want to show you how it is tied to the people who created those labels and terms were also engaged in eugenics. And they're all from either Germany, some of them were Nazis, worked with the Nazis, some of them were from um, Europe and England, and they worked with Margaret Sanger, who created Planned Parenthood. And as you know, Planned Parenthood is basically, people talk about it and they talk about birth control and this, that, and other, but they don't understand that birth control is actually controlling, the white folks' term for controlling the population. And if you look at the language from early eugenics societies, like that's what it was for. So now, between liberalism and women's rights to choose and all this women's suffrage, somehow transhumanism and sexual freedom, all of it is tied together, and I'm gonna explain to you how it's tied together. And I'm just gonna work on one section, but it's really important. Then I'm gonna show you some examples of some things that are actually happening now related to transhumanism that we are not even aware of. And I just want you to be um, aware, because it plays a role in what we eat, it plays a role in our food, it plays a role in medicine, it plays a role in technology, it plays a role in what we're learning and what we hear, what our kids are seeing. And so I want everybody to be aware of it who follows me, because you need to be aware of what is happening at every time, every moment, everything. There's an agenda for everything. We don't really have choices. They make you think you have a choice, but you really don't have that many choices. We're really not free. Um, when Neely Fuller Jr. talks about we're hostages in the white supremacist world, like that's true. And after I did this piece, like I was like, we just hostages, and only thing you can do is try to find the truth, and then go from there. So I'm not gonna waste any more time. I'm gonna get right into this. So I'm gonna share my screen with you, because I need to take you someplace. Let's see. So, what I'm about to share with you is the people who were the pioneers of everything trans that we talk about today. When you talk about gender and identities and all this stuff, the people that I'm getting ready to show you, these are not all of them, but these are like the primary players, are responsible for this lead up to transhumanism. And so each step of the way, every time they create something else or create a new identity or have these new studies and what have you, they evolve into something else. So, let me move my screen. Okay. So here, this page, it is someone from the UK created a page, and it's basically just talking about the doctors and scientists and psychiatrists and philosophers who addressed or did research or whatever for human sexuality and gender over the last couple of centuries. And what is important is that from like the late 1800s to now, um, this evolution or this body of um, group of people who have been responsible for this trans movement have pretty much been white. A lot of them are either German or Nordic. Um, uh, and complicated, because what I found is these people, they did research in sexuality and gender and what have you. Sometimes it was evolution, but they also were members of Eugenics Society. And so the two, whether you want to believe it or not, they go hand in hand, because if you are dealing with evolution or sexual reproductive health, then you are learning how people reproduce. You're studying them so that you can create a method or a way to slow the population if you believe that your population can't or will not grow at the rate of other people's populations. And that's kind of what this whole transhumanism thing is all about. At the end of the day, transhumanism is basically a fancy name for eugenics. And so we're going to get into it. So this guy, um, Dr. Magnus Hirschfield, he was born in 1868. He died in 1935, and they call him the Einstein of sex. He was a German physician, sexologist, but also a Jewish homosexual who openly pursued research and political activism to support the normalization of homosexuality. Um, He established the first ever Institute of Sexology in Berlin, which is in Germany, and the World League for Sexual Reform. The institute was famously burnt down by the Nazis in 1933, but thankfully, it says Hirschfield was out of the country at the time and indeed never returned. He was the one responsible for coining the term transvestite to describe a man who likes to wear women's clothes for sexual reasons. Um, so, this term was coined somewhere between, you know, the late 1800s, early 1900s. I think it was like 1920 something. I'm not sure the date, but anyway, this is the person who created transvestite, the word transvestite, which today is a slur. So I just want to say, I'm not calling anybody transvestite. I'm just saying this name has evolved over time, like everything else does. But this is the person that created this whole trans cross, changing your identity. It was coined with him. Um, what this piece doesn't tell you, after I did some research on him, is that this man was also a part of the British Eugenics Society. And so while he was heavily vested in, um, you know, um, research and political activism related to homosexuality, he also was concerned with Black people and other people that they deem useless eaters or undesirables for the purposes of population control. They wanted to make sure, people didn't overpopulate the earth or didn't overrun white people. And so when I was studying about this man, what I learned is and about all these people, about how complicated they were, and it helps me understand how sexuality and sex, like we always ask, how did the LGBTQ issues come into the picture and get attached to us and civil rights and so on and so forth, and those people still tend to be racist. This was a classic example of that. These people were pro, um, sex research, sex positive, so on and so forth, liberal in sexuality, anything to do with sexuality, including pedophilia. But when it came to race and uh, just ethnicity, they all mostly had the same ideology of that white people were the preferred, or the should be the top of the social hierarchy, and that other people should not be. And so that is a theme. But I just kind of want to give you this before I go into the piece that I wrote. So Dr. Magnus Hirschfield coined the term transvestite. Iwan Block, um, he was the father of sexology too, and he created or came up with this journal of sexology. This man also was a eugenist and also eugenicist, I'm sorry, and he also played a role in um, coming up with ways to sterilize people. I'll just put it that way. Um, and he also played a role in what happened in Germany. A lot of these people ended up coming to America and doing work for the military. I'll just say that and leave it there. Um, so um, while here, it just generally talks about their these doctors, their work with and research and writings on sex and gender. They did other things that were terrible and said other things that were terrible. Dr. David Caldwell, um, he was an American sexology pioneer. He wrote Psychopathia Transsexualis in 1949. in which the word transsexual was used for the first time, and made the observation that gender identity is different to sex. The first being referred to as psychological sex, and gender is plastic, and the second being biological sex. So you see in 1949, transsexual came about. And this particular doctor was actually an American doctor. Alan Block, I think he was an Australian doctor. And as you know, Dr. Magnus Hirschfield was German and he was Jewish. Michael Dillon was a gender pioneer on 2 counts. He was born as a woman, Laura Maud Dillon, but from an early age knew his gender was that of a man. He became the first Briton to undergo female to male sexual reassignment surgery when he had phalloplasty. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correct. Phalloplasty, the construction of a penis. He was also a sectional pioneer in his own right, and in 1946, in a paper, Self, a Study of Ethics and Endocrinology, he argued that therapy could not change a trans person's gender, but instead surgical interventions and hormones were the necessary pathway. So this person really didn't create any labels or anything new. They just um, lived as a trans person. And as you can see, all of this stuff came from Europe, and all of it was done by white people. And all of it was done within the last century and a half. So, you know, and I will say, once you start doing research, you'll see that, people, trans people, even though they didn't call them that back then, have always been around. But this push to change came within the last 100 years or so. Um, Dr. Harry Benjamin was born in Germany but settled in America and was a prominent sexologist and endocrinologist. His research in the subject started when he was a doctor. He was invited to assess a boy. He wanted to be a girl. In 1966, he published The Transsexual Phenomenon, which explained the non-therapeutic pathway towards gender transition. He established the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, which later became the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. So again, you see, you have doctors coming from Germany to America and providing the language that we use today. Um, the next person is Dr. John Olivine, which I could barely find any information about this person, which was so weird. But he was a psychiatrist and an author. He was also German, that I later found out through some research. But he used the word transgenderism for the first time. And he also um, connected it to transsexualism. So, again, this is another person who was from Germany, and they all kind of studied in the same place, um, this World League for Sexual Reform. It evolved into something else. I can't remember what the name is right now. But anyway, it's all tied together. And if you look in the piece that I wrote, you'll find the links to everything. The next person is Dr. Alfred Kinsey. Um, he created um, the Kinsey scale. which was a sliding scale of how heterosexual or homosexual a person may be. He founded the Kinsey Institute in Indiana, which continues to research love and sexuality in humans. Um, I'm not sure where Dr. Kinsey came from, but it's just very interesting to see, um, the connection to all these different people. Uh, and the last person is Virginia Prince. Um, she was born a man named Arnold Lohman, but from an early age preferred to present as a woman. Importantly, she did not regard herself as transsexual and did not want the various hormones and surgeries to confirm her womanhood. Through her work, including establishing the magazine Transvestia, she made a significant contribution to the public's awareness of trans people. She popularized the word transgender, but used it to differentiate the from transsexuals and their need for medical interventions. So I'm gonna change my screen for a second. All right. Okay. Now this is the piece that I'm going to get into the piece that I wrote. And so for this section, I just basically say they've been laying the groundwork for a long time for this transhumanism. And let me give you the definition. So transhumanism basically is the next frontier. I think it's stupid. There's no need. We don't need transhumanism because the world was doing fine before white people felt like they needed to intervene and fix stuff and make things better. They haven't made anything better thus far. Between cloud seeding and changing the weather and modifying the food and destroying crops and um, depopulation efforts and war. Like, the world has never been in a worse situation. And here we are trying to do something else to create another intervention. And it's just idiotic. And so what we need to do is we need to know what it is so that we can push back against it. Um, So, transhumanism basically is a class of philosophies of life that seek the continuation and acceleration of the evolution of intelligent life beyond its currently human form and human limitations. And basically, they're saying that they need to help us be better. Um, we're okay and on the intelligence scale, but we could be better, and that in our current form we have limitations that prevent us from doing what, like, I don't even really understand it. It's so annoying, um, this definition, but it just makes no sense. And um, they say they're going to use science and technology that is going to, they're going to be guided by that and promote the principles and values of, I guess, whatever transhumanism is supposed to be about. But I want you to pay attention to this section right here where it says science and technology. And notice, I don't know if you've really been paying attention since COVID, people have been saying, I follow the science, I'm guided by science, I believe the science. That is not by accident. when you look at humanism and where it's going, where it came from, how it's evolved, and where it's trying to go, all of it is tied together. So, I just want you to be really conscious of some of the things that they are putting out in the atmosphere. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's good. That means you have not lost your senses. That means you are really paying attention to what is happening and you know that it's not normal. If you were tricked by this, then you may want to pay attention. Um, and I know, people have been told that different things are conspiracy theories, this, that, and another. Everything ain't a conspiracy theory. And all you got to do is get on Harriet Tubman's internet and do your own research, and you will find a lot of things that have been labeled conspiracy theories are true. They're just, you know, blurted out in a way that sounds incoherent, and the media can get a soundbite and be like, "Oh, these people are crazy." But everything people say is not a lie, and some of the things that are happening are really important. We're like in the middle of this experimental phase, and the powers that be are pushing us to see how far we will allow them to take us. And before you know it, you won't be able to go back. Like we're done with the days that we had prior to Trump and COVID. That time you could just forget about it. And so if you're looking to go back to normal, that's not coming back. What you have to be prepared for is what is coming. And this transhumanism is slowly going to creep. It's already here. We are eating genetically modified food. We eat it. We don't even know what's in it. A lot of times they can sell it to us in the store. It's not labeled. Our water has stuff in it we don't know we're drinking. They see the clouds and change the weather. There's so much stuff going on. And I don't want to tell you everything. Just pay attention to what's happening. Follow, um, different science and technology magazines, and I put a link to a lot of things in this piece that you can actually uh, go to regularly. Their sites, and they put out stuff every day about what research and development has been doing and what new discoveries they have. It's a lot of crazy stuff out here. So gonna go down to this is one thing that I wanted to talk about that was important because I don't know if you remember the connection from the pioneers of everything trans. Most of those people are European or from Germany, and they were connected to Nazis. And a lot of those people came to America and they started institutes and they did research, and they worked for the federal government. So when we talk about transhumanism, we're talking about the very people who were tied to some other things that are interested in basically changing everything about us and creating the designer people that they want. And as a Black person, you know that if they get the chance to figure out how to get our Black asses off the earth, we going first. So, it's really important that we understand and pay attention to what is happening in science and technology because everything impacts us. It's going to impact us first. We may not feel it, but it'll impact us first. What the impact of it will be, we don't know because all of it is new and it's being rolled out, and we're all being practiced on right now. So I just want you to be aware of what's happening. So, here, I make the comment about the same people who created trans-engineered foods, which are genetically modified or altered food, um, also gave Nazis asylum, and those are the people that I was telling you about. A lot of those people left Europe and Germany and came to America, and they worked in programs like Operation Paperclip, where the federal government pick their brains and use them to do research and development for them for eugenics programs. And that's a one big reason why, Planned Parenthood is really a big deal. And depending on, it's a big deal for white people because they want to have the right to control their population. And we didn't always have that. We did natural birth control, or we just didn't have that. If you got pregnant, you just had children, and you know, it was what it was. But now, we have these options, and we're not necessarily aware of the connection to eugenics and to transhumanism. So it's really important that if you look at this piece, you click on as many links as you can and do your own research. I put the information in there for that reason. I want you to understand the connections to Germany, Nazis, transsexuality, transgenderism, trans everything over the years to here we are talking about transhumanism. So it's all connected. The people that created all of this, they're all connected in some way. And so I go back to talking about they've been laying the groundwork for a long time. So if you take a look at any of the pioneers associated with anything coined trans, associated with sex, sexuality, gender, sexual orientation, and or identity since the early 1900s, you'll find a similar thread connecting them all. Most of the folks were connected to the World League of Sexual Reform, an organization created by Magnus Hirschfield, and that was the guy who coined the term transvestite. Um, and while he did research and development and wrote papers on sex, sexuality, and gender, he was also connected to eugenics. So during my research, I found Hirschfield had plenty of overlap between the eugenics movement and the sexual openness movement that was centered around the Institute of Sexology, which the second guy, I think it was Alwyn Block created. Hirschfield himself praised British scientists as distinguished pioneers in eugenics, and many sexual reform activists worked hand in hand with prominent American eugenicists like Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. So, here is where you start marrying trans, this and that, and it's tied to Planned Parenthood, birth control, women's rights, so on and so forth. And so this is where the connection came in. In 1913, Hirschfield founded, along with Alwyn Block, which is the other guy I was telling you about, and this other guy, Heinrich Korber, the Medical Society for Sexual Science and Eugenics, and that was a real thing. So here is where you get sexual science and eugenics practice at the same time. And these people are the same people that coined a lot of the trans terms that we use today. These people openly practice racism and eugenics while advocating for the rights of homosexuals and transsexuals. So uh, again, you see the connection back in the early 1900s. They were working their magic, they were in eugenics labs, they were having think tanks, philosophers, scientists, researchers, doctors, um, interested people who were transgender, transsexuals, or what have you. They would have a national international conference, and they would come up with ideas and ways to normalize um, everything trans. And so that's why we have what we have today. Sexual science, transhumanism, and eugenics are and always have been connected if we take the time to do our own research. And so, again, if you click the links here where, I talk about they practice racism and um, Eugenics Together. And here there's a quote from Julian Huxley, who I will go into in this piece before I go into him. Pioneers in abortion, birth control, and transgenderism were all affiliated with the World League for Sexual Reform, which was founded in 1928 by Magnus Hirschfield, the German doctor who created the term transvestite. Um, and during the Congress for Sexual Reform, one of the first places that trans anything came up was in 1928, and it was associated with gender assignment surgeries that had been conducted by Soviets and Germans. And so here is where you begin to see the connections between um, transgender, transsexualism, um, science, and how it became it was exported from Germany and the UK to America. So the origins of transhumanism was coined by an English biologist, eugenicist, and philosopher, Julian Huxley, in 1957. Um, Huxley influenced modern embryology, systematics, and studies of behavior and evolution, and was best known among biologists for coining the term evolutionary synthesis to refer to the unification of taxonomy, genetics, and Darwin theory in the 1940s. And this is really important because it lets you know how all these things tie together. So transhumanism today was created by this man, and you get to see his thoughts, and his thoughts were not necessarily good thoughts. So, when they talk about transhumanism today, it's an evolution of what he was thinking about back then. And so whatever he had on paper and whatever his ideas were, just think in the 40s. Here we are in 2022, and they are ready to implement the things that he could only dream of um, in his warped mind. Huxley was the first director of UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, a leader of a leading Fabian socialist, and I'll explain what that is. Uh, Fabian socialist movement was basically a theory that emerged from activities which were founded in London in 1884. And they all are, pretty much tied to um, eugenics. And not all of it, but it's basically concerned where you see why people are concerned about resources and so on and so forth. Um, this is where it came from. So when Fabianism emerged in the United Kingdom during the 1800s, collectivism was widely considered necessary for human flourishing. Although some traditional liberals clung to laissez-faire politics and economics, theorists of new liberalism, such as T.H. Green in the 1880s, believed that substantial state intervention would be necessary if ordinary individuals were to prosper. Now, ordinary individuals could not prosper if rich people were in the way and preventing that. And we're dealing with the same thing today. In the early years of the 20th century, the dominant liberal position involved acceptance and advancement of the extension of public control in industry. That dominant position also involved collective responsibility for children's education and nutrition, housing and employment, along with support for care of the sick and aged. Fabians sought to propagate their ideas by means of what they call premiation, targeted collectivists, liberal politicians, and radical social activists. Um, Webb insisted that unconscious socialism had already succeeded through public control of services, largely through municipalities. He thus believes that the Fabians should strive to influence the mainstream Liberal Party. Although in his preface to the 1990 edition of the Fabians essay, Webb said that Fabians had always intended to create a new party. It's pretty much the same thing that we see today. Um, Rich people want to control resources. Um, they want to determine what equality was, and um, their concern for poor people was very superficial. Like they just were not trying to do nothing for poor people, pretty much just like they are today. It's almost like the rich people say, I don't want to pay taxes, but I will give you money. I'll donate money to your business. Well, once that money is spent, there's no money coming, and they're not doing anything to contribute to society when they don't pay taxes. And so it was pretty much kind of like that same mindset. I want to control how people are helped, and that's the gist of it. So this guy Huxley, the one who created transhumanism, was the uh, Fabian socialist. They say he was a leading Fabian socialist, a supporter of women's rights, and anti-racist slash Nazi. Yet Huxley was also a member of the British Eugenics Society and a lifelong campaigner for population control through abortion and birth control. And I also say the dude also worked closely with Margaret Sanger in Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger and her close ties and affiliations with prominent eugenicists did not escape me. And that was one of the most interesting things about transhumanism, how it's tied to birth control, how it was tied to eugenics, how it was tied to sexology. And so it was like really just weird doing all the research for this piece. Um, Another thing I want to say about Huxley, the guy who created transhumanism, is that in 1936 he published an article in the Eugenics Review proclaiming birth control had to be taught to the so-called lower strata. That's basically poor people and anybody that they deem useless eaters or not worth anything of society who were reproducing relatively too fast. So he's basically saying, and it's kind of like now. Um, India, China, Africa, Latin America have more people on those continents than there are white people in Europe and in America and Canada. And so their goal has always been to create birth control so that, and push it on those people, us, and um, people in Africa and other continents that were deemed, lower strata. Um, so that we would not produce too fast and so that white people could catch up. And as you can see, it still haven't caught up. They put all abortion clinics in black people's communities. They make sure we have access to birth control. It's everywhere. Still can't catch up. So, of course, they have to find a way to achieve their goal of stopping us from growing and our populations from growing while they can catch up. And that is why you see the push for the biracial ads with the families where it's always one person, white person involved. I talked about that in my other video. You talk about, birth control. Um, that's why they, you know, people are fighting to save the right to have an abortion. And there's all sorts of ways. We're eating genetically modified food, look at war and all the different things that is happening in the world, these people help create all of those policies and plans to make that happen. And so transhumanism is just an evolution of eugenics when you get down to the nitty gritty. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, once said, Huxley brings to the birth control movement the most distinguished intellectual background England can boast. The mother of mainstream eugenics co-signed Huxley. So, you talk about Margaret Sanger and you talk about, you know, her snuggling up to these, you know, eugenicists from England and Germany. She knew what she was doing. And so I put, where she made that quote because she's quoted um, here for saying that. So like you can't divorce Huxley and transhumanism from Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger. They all work together. So the other thing about Huxley is that his grandfather was a eugenicist also, which is like crazy. Um, so let me tell you before I go on to his grandfather. Let me give you a quote from Mr. Eugenicist himself, Mr. Huxley. So he says, therefore, birth control methods must be taught them. They must not have too easy access to relief or hospital treatment, lest the removal of the last check on natural selection should make it too easy for children to be produced or to survive. Long unemployment should be a ground for sterilization, or at least relief should be contingent upon no further children being brought into the world, and so on. And so when you think about that, you understand why in some states, like in the South, they sterilize, women who went to jail. You ever hear the story about Fannie Lou Hamer, how she talked about, she went to the doctor for something and she woke up and that she had surgery. She couldn't have children because they took out her ovaries. They basically gave her a hysterectomy without her permission. That was something huge that they did to a lot of Black people back in the day to keep our numbers down after slavery and during slavery. They perfected basically abortion on slaves so they could give them to white people. So, when you talk about our history and how sick these people were, like this guy who created transhumanism, these are his actual words. That is to say, much of our eugenic program will be curative and remedial merely instead of preventative and constructive. So basically, they want to sterilize us. They don't want to give us options. And that's what he's saying. They don't want to prevent you from having birth control and talk to you about ways to prevent unwanted births. They want to kill the baby, stop you from having children, and punish you if you, happen to not be what they see as productive through long unemployment. If you think you can see how Republicans like to tie, punishment to, you know, not being productive to society. It's all tied to eugenics. Uh, so here I talk about his grandfather. So I hope you understand why I'm alarmed, which when I did this piece, I was really freaked out. And while I'm alarmed by Huxley, the guy who created the label of the term transhumanism, I'm more concerned about his grandfather, Thomas Henry Huxley. Thomas Huxley was a racist scientist and eugenicist. Well, Huxley was proudly known as Darwin's bulldog because he supported some of Darwin's racist ideas on evolution and inferiority. If you don't know anything about Darwin, please go look it up. It's not a good person. Thomas Huxley was your casual everyday racist, making policy and pathologizing non-whites to ensure his ilk remained at the top of their anti-black social hierarchy. And so in here in this section, I just put where you can read more about Thomas Huxley and how terrible he was, his ties to the British Eugenics Society, and you can look at his family tree, and it wasn't good, so just leave it at that. But I just wanted you to see the connections of these people just don't come up out of thin air. It's a whole family. You know, one dies and legacy continues because they done trained the family how to be eugenicists. For example, Thomas Huxley's 1865 essay, Emancipation, Black and White, um, when referencing the average Negro and the white man, he wrote, "And if it be true, it is simply incredible that when all his disabilities are removed and our prognathous relative has a fair field and no favor, as well as no oppressor, he will be able to compete successfully with his bigger brained and smaller jawed rival." And that he was talking about white people, that white people have bigger brains, because at that during that time, in 1865, that's what Darwin's evolution said, that we were not, we were basically inferior. So he says he will be able, he, the Negro, average Negro, will be able to compete successfully with his um, bigger brain, smaller jawed rival in a contest which is to be carried on by thought and not by bites. The highest place in the hierarchy of civilization will assuredly not be within reach of our dusky cousins, though it is by no means necessary that they should be restricted to the lowest. So, this man basically says we're idiots, and that even once we are free with no disabilities and no restraints, no constraints, that we can compete, but we should not be at the top of the social hierarchy. And so, when you talk about white supremacy, this is the crux of it right here. These people created what America lives by today. Um, and let me give you another little bit about Thomas Huxley. Thomas Huxley had an entire environmental science college named after him on the campus of Western Washington University in Oregon, until it was removed in December 2021 after the institution conducted a legacy review on Huxley's sordid connections to racism and eugenics. I'm feeding you this for context and to demonstrate how long it takes white people to come around to see the error of their ways. And I just say context matters. And that's one thing that I did with this entire piece, is that I provide context so that you can see the buildup to transhumanism. It's not by accident. It is not free of, whatever people want to call it, conspiracy theories or whatever. But this science is tied into everything. It's tied into our policy. It's tied into our criminal justice system. Just everything around, how this country operates. You listen to the thoughts of these people who were philosophers and doctors and scientists, researchers. These people created what we are today. They created white society, and how we live and suffer, and just how inequitable things are. They are the cause of it. Let's see. There was one more thing that I wanted to share, but I'm going to close this piece. Basically, transhumanism is simply an evolution of eugenics made far more complex than it needs to be. The power that the powers that be are selling it to us like some wonderful technology or scientific advances that will improve humankind. But when have humans ever done such a thing? When humans mess with nature, they disturb the delicate, unexplainable balances they have no control over. Transhumanism is dangerous, and we need to pay close attention to it, to what's happening in science and technology. Nothing is innocent. No advance is too big or too small. They all are taking us to some future we didn't ask for. And if we don't fight it, basically, we're all going to be doomed. And so everybody has to be vigilant about the transhumanism agenda. And you can think about metaverse with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Um, just so many things with virtual reality. They're creating virtual sex. Like, who needs to have virtual sex? Please tell me why. Real sex is good. Like, why would you create virtual sex with you don't have anybody? Like, it's just mind-boggling the things that they come up with. So I put a couple of stories here about things that we need to watch for, and they're just some examples. So there's technology, and I don't want to get into this story, but basically it's there are nanoparticles and nano-octopus particles in the jab vaccine, and the jab vaccine is interesting combo. So I won't go into it, but I did put the story in here so that you can look at it, you can watch the video, and you can see exactly what is inside of the vaccine, and what the goal is. Um, the next story I put here is about enhanced intelligence, virtual reality sex, and cyborg future. Um, and I just say they're talking about virtual reality sex and cyborgs. Why do we have to have virtual sex, and what is wrong with the sick asses who sit in rooms and dream up such stupidity? CRISPR gene editing is another thing that we need to pay attention to. Um, if they figure out a way to design us out of existence, trust me, they will. So CRISPR gene editing is really important. It's something that we need to pay attention to. Um, Another story is about the nano sensors. They will tell you where diseases are if you just swallow a nano sensor. Um, it's probably going to be impersonal, and I don't know how expensive it is going to be. I imagine with all technology, it's probably not going to be cheap. Um, so I just, said I want my breast exams and regular doctor visits. Fill me right up, and I appreciate it because I don't want to take any nanosensors for anything. I would like traditional medicine. Put your hand on me, talk to me, listen to me. I don't want to take something and go home and then have a computer looking inside of my body, and I don't even have to be in the same room with the person. Like, that's not cool. Another thing they're working on is sticky DNA to build organized structures of gel blocks. And it's basically strands of real DNA from anything that has DNA that's living. And entire people eventually will be built from those tiny pieces of DNA. So it could be, you could die, or they could take a mummy or something that they value, put it in a tube, or how, whatever the evolution of that is. And there you have it. You have a whole person that they designed from strands of DNA. Sounds great, doesn't it? Um, DARPA. Won't talk about DARPA. It is basically um, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's the federal government's research on nanotech, R&D, biomedical advances, and transhumanism. So that's really a good place for you to be reading and doing some research. So check their latest news frequently. You won't be able to sign up for notices, but just go there and check regularly. I strongly recommend it. Here, the military is out here naming Epstein-Barr virus, and it's just not good. It's in the Science magazine, so click on that and check it out. And there are some other stories here too. Another one is plant-based nanoparticles could eventually replace antibiotics. So they're going to grow plants with nanoparticles in them, and then you're going to eat them and take them, and then you're just going to be like, oh, I'm so healthy because I ate this plant, when you're actually eating plastic. Why we need that when we have whole plants out here that can heal us right now, I don't know, but that's what they're doing, people. So I'm going to stop here. I just wanted to let y'all see, um, what is going on, what transhumanism really is about, and why it is so important that we pay attention to it, because there's no stopping white supremacy. White people have been trying to figure out how they're going to overtake the world, overtake all the resources, control all the resources, control all the people forever, since we came in contact with them. So I just want us to be aware of what's happening, and don't be so willy-nilly happy going with every advance, everything that they put out here. They talk about metaverse, and it's going to be so great, and you're going to have virtual reality. Forget that stuff. Like, we have been living centuries, thousands of years without any intervention from man, and doing just fine. So we don't need the things that they're creating, and it is not going to help us. The landfill is full of stuff that white supremacy created that was supposed to help us, that isn't helping us, and it's just not ever going to go away. It's just trash. So think of transhumanism in that way. That's how I think of it. It's just trash. It's creating stuff, saying it's going to make stuff better for us. It ain't going to make nothing better. It's just going to help make the world end faster. So that's just my 2 cents. Now, you may love transhumanism. You can do whatever you want to do with science or whatever. I'm recommending people get back to the basics. Life is not that complicated. Yes, we have to work. Even if you're going to live off the land and homestead, you got to work to eat. You got to work to live. So just be mindful of what you get yourself into. Be mindful about where the powers that be, the dominant society, are trying to take us. And don't necessarily buy into everything that you hear, and don't assume because you don't hear about something, everything is okay. With this agenda, now up is down, down is up, left is right, right is left, wrong is right, and right is wrong. So, if something is being called a conspiracy theory, get on your internet and research it for yourself. Do thorough research. Don't just look at the first couple of search options and go on. Like, you really need to research what's happening in this world, because there are a lot of things that are going on, and we're distracted with racism and politics and social issues and wars and threats of wars, so on and so forth, and just nonsense stuff. Diaspora wars, gender wars, straight people versus, the LGBTQIA plus community. So much stuff going on that's so much more important that we are missing because we are distracted. So pay attention, read, this article, click on the links in the description, and don't be afraid, but you have to fight back. Like, you can't just walk into transhumanism, because if you do, there's no coming out of it. So we have to push back, and you see people pushing back. Don't necessarily think people that are pushing back and upset are wrong. And don't think just because, um, just, I'll just say, everything Republicans say ain't wrong, and everything Democrats say and do ain't right. And we don't have, in most instances, both are playing on the same team. Be smart. Use your common sense. And don't assume that you know everything. So, there are some things that are grounded in just plain old common sense, but there are some things that we need to do some research on in transhumanism, biotechnology, biomedical advances, and nanotechnology. Those are things that we need to really be checking out because they're in our food, they're in our water, um, they're in our medicine. Things are being proposed for us, and we are not really getting a say in whether or not we want to participate in it or not. So, I want to close there. Just be safe, people, and do your own research. Don't assume everything is a conspiracy theory because everything ain't a conspiracy theory. And I can't stress that enough. A lot of people talking about a lot of stuff, but we do not invest in science enough. We don't spend enough time talking about science and technology. So, I'm going to stop there. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you like this type of content. I don't do this type of stuff all the time, but I just felt like this was really important because it's taking us someplace and it's something that we need to talk about. So again, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you enjoyed this, consider um, you know providing a donation or subscribing to my Patreon so that I have time to research things that are going to benefit the Black community because we need to know we are being preyed upon. And so, I want to make sure I talk about some things that other people aren't talking about to help keep us up to date on just what's going on in the world. So have a good weekend, people. And again, thank you for watching.